Welcome back to New Persuasive Words. I'm Scott Jones.
And I'm Bill Bohr.
Bill, a sad day. Sad day.
It is a sad day.
The death
But
of the world's conscience.
yeah, I saw that as a headline. But it's a life, Pope Francis is a life that's worth celebrating. And I was thinking that.
Do you think things would have been different? I mean, it's hard to speculate about these things, but what if he hadn't met with JD Vance? I mean, look, if your health is teetering, I mean, I wouldn't. That wouldn't be somebody it's going to give you a jolt of anything positive. I would think
so, right, man.
Push you right over the edge.
Everything they touch is dying right now. But yeah, I mean, I first of all, the idea of I was telling I've used this as my my metaphor for the last three popes, John Paul II, who arguably is one of the great popes of all time. I mean, I don't think that's. I think there are a lot of people who would agree with me on that one. That he's that kind of giant of a person, and his personality as well as his piety, as well as what he did. So I always say that I think they've had three very exceptionally qualified popes the Roman Church has. Maybe the best three back to back that at least maybe since the time of the reforming popes in the early Middle Ages. But I think John Paul II was the starting pitcher. Benedict was the middle relief, and Francis was the closer to kind of prepare the Catholic Church for the 21st century. And
that would make him Charlie Sheen in Major League, the great.
But I do think,
and ironically, Charlie Sheen used to say, he was a Vatican assassin who drank tiger's blood.
Right.
I was a Charlie Sheen fan. We were podcasting when Charlie Sheen went through. Those were the early years for us when Charlie Sheen had his meltdown. I was always I had a Sheen soundboard on my first iPad.
Jeez.
I was a huge Charlie Sheen guy.
I'm more of a Martin Sheen guy, but
hey, that's my president.
That's
President Bartlett.
Yeah. That's my president.
It's also great. One of the I've seen the West Wing so many times. It's so crazy how many times I've watched it all the way through. But that was one of the great depictions of faith on television.
Oh, yeah.
Martin Sheen's.
Well, it's a genuine faith too.
Just and as president, I mean, it was just exactly the kind of president you would want. I mean, exactly the sort of faith you'd want in the White House. Excellent.
I think Biden's faith was very similar.
I mean, what would Trump say?
You think Joe Biden? You think you could even stay awake during the mass? Okay, I mean,
yeah, no. But I getting back to Pope Francis. It's remarkable.
By the way. I mean, Pope Francis, gets out. He can barely speak and still comes out and does this beautiful Easter blessing.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. And Donald Trump, did you read?
I read the Easter message, yes.
The Easter, should I read it or no?
No, it should not be.
To the radical leftists, okay?
No, it was an abomination. Yeah.
To the left, it's Joe Biden who had egg prices so high we almost couldn't have Easter. Okay.
Yeah, I need no Trump today on Easter Monday.
It's all every day is a day for Trump. Sadly, depending on your political persuasion, but that is true. Every day is a day for Trump in these days.
Yeah, sucks the very life out of everything. And the media just plays into it, right? But no,
what can you do though? I mean, that's the thing. What can you do?
Thing. Well,
we still have not figured it. That's the thing. It's remarkable, right? This has been now, year. Well, we're in year 5, right, of 2 terms punctuated by
a stolen election,
as Trump would say. No, punctuated by Biden's term. But then it's not as though this was new, right? I mean, the 2016 election. It's just. So, I mean, it's more than 5 years, and more than, it's 9 years, because the 4 years that the interregnum, so to speak, it's not like Trump shut up.
No.
But, It's just remarkable how still an inability. Why doesn't the media talk to us? We know what we're doing.
Right. I don't know. Well, that's a good question.
Why don't we invite? I mean, Bill Maher's invited to dinner. Why aren't we invited to dinner with Kid Rock?
Oh my goodness.
Do you know what Kid Rock song I do like, and I've done as a duet, and I love for karaoke? Picture.
Oh.
With Sheryl Crow.
Yeah, that's a good song.
I mean, that's one of the few Kid Rock songs I think is listenable.
Yeah, and I think she probably wrote it. Don't remember for sure. Yeah.
I would guess.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, you don't hear Kid Rock on the show. Mentioned.
No,
right?
I don't.
Hey, look, this is potpourri here. We're an eclectic cultural matrix here at New Persuasive Words. You never know,
right?
What will be brought up,
right? So, your assessment of Pope Francis?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I have many things. I loved this Pope. I thought this Pope was amazing. Very. And I loved your analogy about the pitching. It was great. 3 great pitching. It's 9 innings of great pitching. I think that one of the things that for me was most remarkable about Pope Francis was combining 2 roles that are not always easy to combine. He was both prophet and evangelist. And I think those roles often don't go hand in hand, right? Often the prophet
very hard, yeah.
speaks the words of justice, speaks the hard words, the words of truth you need to hear.
Right.
But oftentimes is not winsome, is not inviting, right? And oftentimes the evangelist, the person who has a knack for going out to the least, the last, the lost, to reach out to the furthest, the furthest out. Oftentimes they're not the voice of conscience for church or world. Francis elegantly wove these together. As someone else who I think wove these together was someone we talked about this year. Tony Campola was a person who had the prophetic voice and the evangelistic voice, could talk about social justice, but also had the joy of the gospel and could invite people into faith. And so I think in general, Pope Francis was in a time when, in the West at least, when religion is on the ropes to some degree, right? This is not true in the global South, of course, but in the industrialized West and in the late stage capitalist West, religion has had a hard time, and I think Francis was a great image for religious life. He was somebody that was in the institution, but could be someone that brought life into it. That I think a lot of people found that. I mean, I remember one woman I read when he came to Philadelphia. I read the story, or maybe in New York. It was in one part of his American visit years ago, and I guess it was the one to New York, I think. But this woman said, she was an Episcopalian, I think, and she said that she knew she had some traumatic thing. I don't know if it was a failed relationship or something. She had this tremendous amount of pain and guilt she was carrying around and felt burdened, and she said she knew if he looked at her, she would be healed. And she looked at him, and she said she felt healing. And I think there was many stories like that with Francis, right, where just his presence seemed to be a healing factor, seemed to be able to be transformative.
Yeah, he certainly presented a humanity. He was whimsical, candid, maybe sometimes, shot from the hip a little bit more than you usually think you think of with a Trump or with a Pope, just because I think he was really engaged with the press, which, was not the way he was as an archbishop. I mean, you and I actually talked with that movie, The Two Popes, which is that a Netflix movie that we
we talked about that
Netflix
years movie,
ago. And it's a fictitious account, but I do think there's some really good insight in that movie about some of the the compromises, some of the failures that he went through during his during all the craziness that was going on in South America, and he learned. I think he learned some hard lessons, some tragic lessons.
Became the head of the Argentinian Jesuit order at 36, right? So he was,
Right.
he didn't go straight to the priesthood. He was a chemical engineer or something, right? And then
Right.
by 36, he becomes the head of the Jesuit order. And he remarked, this is his words, my authoritarian and quick manner of making decisions led me to have serious problems and to be accused of being ultra conservative.
Well, I think, yeah, and also in the backdrop of what was happening with the political oppression in Argentina, people, the protesters disappearing, children being, just the horrific crimes that were going on, and of course, Jesuits are, tend to be people who identify with the poor, who speak out against social justice, and so it was it was a very difficult time, and there certainly was some institutional failure there, right? I mean, at
Yeah.
least some failure of leadership. Not that he did anything morally wrong, but he didn't always navigate that well. That part of his life is treated very well in that movie.
It's interesting. And so he was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998 and elevated to cardinal 3 years later, all by John Paul II. And and then he was runner-up in 2005 for the conclave that elected Pope Benedict, who resigned 8 years later. But in 2000, or in that same year, when he was, I'm reading from this article, and I'm trying to figure out if this was that he published an agenda-setting document called Evangelia Gaudium, right? So this was, this was him. This was early in his papacy that he published this, and this is so great. This is a great word here. He says, he asked in a line singled out for praise by former U.S. President Barack Obama, how can it be that it is not a news item when an elderly homeless person dies of exposure, but it is news when the stock market loses 2 points? It's just, and
Well,
again,
and he was, he was criticized. A quote similar to that is when he was criticized for blessing a gay man, and he said, "Now, how is it that I will give a papal blessing to a businessman who has done many questionable things in his life, and nobody ever raises a thing, but I give a blessing to this young man, and suddenly that makes me, that's controversial. So that's the hypocrisy of that is ridiculous," he said, and that's a paraphrase, but I do think he was he took some chances. The people, the very progressive wing of the Catholic Church, was disappointed. Didn't feel like he didn't really do anything. They don't really change things very much, but certainly he had strong critics. Some critics of this, some ultra right wing critics of this country as well.
He did say, by the way, his autobiography was published earlier this year, which was meant to come out, I think, only after his death, but it came out before he passed tragically this morning. This morning.
Yeah.
He was critical of traditionalist Catholics that attended the Latin Mass that was, I think, Benedict brought back, right? And
he didn't bring it.
Was John Paul, or they
allowed they allowed this one movement. I don't remember the details. That's still not without controversy. But
so in this autobiography, which is titled "Hope: The Autobiography," he says that he criticized Latin Mass goers who extol the aesthetic and devotional qualities of that liturgy as ideologues of backwardism, and wrote that the fancy vestments and lace of traditionalist priests sometimes conceal mental imbalance.
It's true.
It's such,
Well,
and this guy who wrote this article, is this Rocca? Who is this? This is Francis Rocca, who I found this in the Free Press, but he's covered the Vatican for years, and he writes in the Wall Street Journal, I think. But he's comments, such invective likely reflected a naturally combative temperament, but there is also a strategic element. Like the formal Peronist he was as a youngster, he once sprayed an uncle with seltzer water for speaking against Evita. He used elites, including his own bishops, as foils to bond with the people. Though he was himself the supreme head of a hierarchy that heavily emphasizes obedience, and he did not hesitate to use his power whenever he deemed appropriate, he cast himself as the champion of lay people and repeatedly inveighed against the vice of clericalism or excessive deference to the priesthood.
well, I shared this story when I was with a group of part of an extension of Shalom Hartman, and one of the people that I had been in Israel with was in charge of theological education in the Diocese of Chicago. A great guy who died a few years ago. Great soul. But he had friends inside the Vatican, and he told this story. So he's my source. But apparently, pretty soon after Francis was elected Pope, he walked through the parking garage of the Vatican of the Vatican offices and was taking down license plates of sports cars and fancy expensive cars. And he got together with everybody and says, those of you who are driving these cars, you need to get rid of them. We're priests, we're not princes.
That's fantastic.
That's a fantastic story. I hope that's true. Yeah.
I love the story of when he when he like became Pope, and he's got to cancel his. He does this himself. He wakes up the next morning. I got to cancel my newspaper subscription. This is Joseph. This is Joseph Bergoglio. F you, and they hung up on him.
Yeah.
I mean, these are just it's. So then Rocca goes on to write this, which I think is well said and interesting. There's a striking symmetry in the timing of Francis' death. The most influential and inspiring figure of the global left departs just as President Trump's return to power fuels a resurgent wave of right-wing populism worldwide. Underscoring that symmetry is the fact that his final public meeting was with J.D. Vance. He met the U.S. Vice President, the U.S.'s Vice President at Catholic Convert in Easter Sunday. And, he, right before he was hospitalized, earlier this year, a week before he was hospitalized, he wrote a letter, sent an open letter to the U.S. bishops saying the act of deporting people who in many cases have left their own land for reasons of extreme poverty, insecurity, exploitation, persecution, or serious deterioration of the environment damages the dignity of many men and women and of entire families and places them in a state of particular vulnerability and defenselessness.
Yeah, but I think it's a misnomer. I think it is a misnomer to call concern for the poor and an advocacy for refugees liberal. It's in the heart of the Talmud. It's in the heart of conservative Judaism, and it has been a central part of what Christians have been doing since the beginning. And I think it's the anomaly, if you would, is when in the name of Christianity, injustice and the poor are ignored and exploited. So I mean, Christians
don't you think though
Christians have done it forever? Don't get me wrong, but yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But don't you think the casting of him as a figure of the global left, which I probably don't, I don't think I categorically disagree with this, is not just his call to be attentive to the poor, but the systemic critiques, right? the systemic capitalist critiques, which were in Benedict too. I mean, they were muted. They weren't as
in
pronounced.
John Paul. They were in John.
And
Paul
then John
II.
Paul, yeah. So these
Absolutely.
were all, yeah, these were there, right? But they're more pronounced, perhaps, in Francis, and also on climate change. I mean,
Well, yeah,
it was
but I
not
think
silent. It was not silent. I mean,
No,
he
he's not-
was.
But you see,
He
the
was.
same. Yeah,
And I had a rabbi friend today that told me he was not thrilled with his statements in the last year on Israel, and so, I mean, there were
because Christians were getting bombed. So if you're the Pope and your flock are getting killed,
I like my popes not condemning Christians bound, okay?
yeah,
This is. Do you remember when? Do you remember when Trump said, when Bill O'Reilly? No, this is sad. We're talking about the death of the world's conscience, but when Bill O'Reilly is the conscience, remember when he said to Trump, "You say you're okay with Putin, but he's a killer. We've got lots of killers here." I mean, talk about that was. I mean, wow.
But no, I think you're. It's interesting. I mean, a radical critique of Darwin, or predatory capitalism. You can find that all over in John Paul II.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You
Yeah.
can find in Benedict too. So I think, but again, I think there was a more liberal temperament. Okay, he made traditionalist. He was more apt to take on traditionalist, certainly, than Benedict or John Paul II.
Probably the five most famous words of his papacy were when asked. I think this was in a trip.
It was early.
Right?
It was early on,
early
right? No,
on
right.
a plane or something, and they asked him about gay priests, and he said, "Who am I to judge?"
Right.
What a beautiful sentiment, right? I mean, just. I mean, that's some of the beauty of this guy's papacy, and it's a gift that he had. I mean, John Paul had it as well, but Francis had it in spades. Benedict didn't, right? I mean, Benedict was not as good at turning the phrase with a camera, right? I mean,
well, Benedict was too. I mean, he was not in good health when he was elected to this position. He's a brilliant academician, one of the best Christian. I was going to say Catholic thinkers, but I think one of the best Christian thinkers of the late 20th century into the 21st century, but not. It was not up to the administrative task of being the Pope, and I think, yeah, I think it's remarkable given. I mean, it's remarkable Francis has lived as long as he did. I mean, it's a crazy job to be giving somebody at this stage of life, right? But yeah.
He visited 13 Muslim majority countries as Pope.
Yeah.
And in 2019, we remember he issued a joint statement with a prominent Muslim cleric, Grand Imam of Al-Hazir, Ahmad El-Tayab, in support of human fraternity, which included a renunciation of violence in the name of religion. Yes, I mean, just an interesting. I mean, on many issues, was not afraid to be prophetic, and yet also was somebody that could invite people to faith. I mean, it was a joy in Francis that was wonderful to see.
And again, I think, we've referred to Holland's book a lot, but the fact that given all the well-deserved bad press that Catholicism has gotten over the last decades, it's still the power of the office. The power of the office, and particularly when it is held with humility and a genuine pastor's heart, as you said. I was going to say all Christianity benefited from Francis, but I think the whole world benefited from having someone who actually didn't want. The question whether he wanted the job or not, that's an interesting one. But one who wore, who wore the mantle of St. Peter as noble and as well as anyone in the history of the papacy.
Do you remember at the end of the two popes when he starts donning the papal white, and it's so dramatic. He goes in, the cardinal's clothes, and comes out, and the pope, and he's crying, and he says, "If there are tears, let them be tears of joy." Just a great line from that film, and also, one of the things I love about that film, which this is a work of fiction, right? I mean, this is
Right.
It's not based on actual history, but at least their interactions between
Their interactions are fictitious.
their interactions are fictitious,
Yeah, right.
but this way that you see tradition and reform interact, right? That you can that traditionalism and the reforming spirit can coexist in the church and fraternity, and you need these voices, right? You need people that remind us that tradition is the living faith of the dead.
Yeah.
And the traditionalism is the dead faith of the living, right? And so,
Yourself Pelican, right?
yeah,
Who converted, right? Converted Eastern Orthodoxy, right?
Eastern Orthodoxy, yeah.
Yeah. Towards the end of his life. All right. Well done.
Thou good and faithful servant. Yeah, this is a sad, and the conclave is interesting because of the 138 voting members, I think Francis appointed 102 or 3, something like that. So this is his conclave. This is
his conclave, his legacy. Yeah.
That's a lot. That's huge.
And also there's a sense where I think, well, again, I think it was John Paul II's vision, and it's been carried through, that sooner than later there would be a pope from either Africa or Asia, and we got the first South American pope with Francis, and I would not be surprised if.
And the Jesuits always claimed the first black pope, right? Because there's always 2 popes, right? The white pope, who was the pope in Rome, and then they said the black pope, who was the head of the Jesuit order.
Right.
And Francis was the head of the Jesuit order, right?
Not worldwide, was he? Worldwide head? He was head of it in Argentina. I don't.
He said it in Argentina.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But anyway, we shall see.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, I may be the in-person Vatican reporter.
Wow, yeah. They have Wi-Fi there. We could be recording from Italy.
Do Persuasive Words live from the Vatican.
Live from the conclave. That would be something.
That would be wild.
From Carmel, Indiana to the conclave, we're covering world events as they unfold.
All right. Take care, everybody.
The beat goes on.